Continuation of the debate on the motion. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member for West Bay North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My contribution too will be short. I rise to say that I too will be supporting this motion that the member from Bordentown West has brought before this honorable House. And Mr. Speaker, I too have been fortunate enough to have encountered something similar to the Deputy Premier. In 1991, up until 1991, every time teams left this country, God Save the Queen is what was played for the Cayman Islands. In 1990, having been selected to be the head of the delegation to Cuba, I went to Dr. Melno McCoy in Northside, got the written notes for Beloved Isle Cayman. I went to Mr. Doreen Miller at Radio Cayman, got the recorded songs, and took it to Cuba unbeknownst to anyone. When the Cayman Islands team walked into the stadium, I'll never forget two people in particular, Mr. Mitchell Smith and Mr. John Borden. When Beloved Isle started to play, they ran to the front of the line and they had water in their eyes. The pride and the joy of finally hearing our song as the Cayman Islands walked in. I too have to say something similar to what the member from Newland said when he talks about being the product of a marriage from two different places. And my children, their mother happens to be from Jamaica as well. And there's one thing that I've done, and I think where I've seen a lot of our Caymanians come up short when they marry people from other jurisdictions. They tend to make someone else be dominant. But I too, and I must give my wife credit for also installing that pride, that Caymanian pride. She never gave my children any doubt of what they were, and that was Caymanian first and foremost. To be proud of their heritage on both sides, but that they were Caymanian. Mr. Speaker, I have noted the difference that can be made in school if you have the right people. I watched Mr. Joe Wallace at West Bay Primary for many years, that every time a devotion took place, Beloved Isle Cayman was played. Now I've watched recently, and I've been to devotions where sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. And this is in the schools. So, Mr. Speaker, when I read this, I was very happy and very pleased. And I do hope it is, as the member intends, it was something that bring us together, but also I'm hoping it will help us start to install more pride in the young ones coming through. I too will be supporting this, and I am happy to say thank you to the members for bringing this. I will be supporting it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the mover for his right of reply. Member Bordentown West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank all the members of this honorable House who spoke on this motion. I particularly want to thank the seconder of this motion, Mr. Anthony Eden from Savannah. Mr. Speaker, while this may come as no surprise to many, I think that maybe barring the 1992 elections, when Mr. Eden was running with Mr. Roy Bodden, who I supported, he and I have been on the political divide since, I guess, Roy split. And it is only since being elected, I'm sitting in this honorable house, I have really come to appreciate Mr. Eden and his contribution to the Cayman Islands with his 27 plus years of service to this country. And, you know, as I look back on the events of recent, and I look at the position some people have taken, we also have to recognize that part of what makes the Cayman unique is the fact that we are known as iron men in wooden ships. And it's fair to say that Mr. Eden and many of his generations continue to represent people who would stand cold hard into what they believe. It takes a certain amount of courage to stand up for what you believe in. And I would just like to say that it is a courage I've come to admire. It's a courage I've come to respect. And coward should not call his name. And I'll leave it at that. Mr. Speaker, I also have to give credit to your good self for what it is that you have done in terms of pushing nation building in this country. From our national song, the creation of a children's national choir, a national flower, I think it's fair to say that you have also left your fingerprints on the history of the Cayman Islands, and I think it's safe to say that you will be remembered for a long time, long after you have left this honorable house. A couple weeks back, Mr. Speaker, I had received a copy of the Beloved Isle Cayman, a little kind of book that was done by Dan and Lisa Scott. And when you look back and understand the genesis of how the national song came about, of Miss Lila Ross spending a long time away from home, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I can completely relate as what the Honorable Deputy Premier was speaking about. For the first half of my life, Mr. Speaker, I spent half of it away at school overseas. 8 years in Kingston and 4 years in New York. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, it is only when you're really away from Cayman you get to really appreciate Cayman. And as a result, I have found a level of appreciation that many people in my own family wouldn't understand. Sometimes I hear some people complain about having rock fever, where they feel like they need to get off the rock. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've reached an age right now and a time where if I don't need to leave, I'm not going nowhere. And when we consider, Mr. Speaker, that you look at the tourism numbers and the amount of people who are saving a lot of money to come here just to get a week or 2 weeks away to say, I've been to the Cayman Islands. And it marvels to see Caymanians rushing to go to run into what they're running from. And they're saving a lot of their hard-earned money just to come here. It says something about us, so I expect our level of staycation to go up. Mr. Speaker, I particularly want to thank also the Minister of Culture and also the Minister of Financial Services from West Bay South. She was really moving and touching her remarks, and to some extent, I think herself, having been away for school also, will understand what it is like when you have this feeling where you just want to come home. My colleague from Newlands, Mr. Speaker, spoke about this being a feel-good motion. And Mr. Speaker, he's right. Because I'm going to tell you right now, when you have lived and worked in many places, it feels really good to be right here in the Cayman Islands. And let me tell you, we may have our challenges, we may have our problems, but Mr. Speaker, make no doubt about it, the Cayman Islands is still one of the best places to live and work on this planet. You know, and that's one of the reasons why I try my best not to speak down or speak anything bad. We'll have our differences with the government. in terms of policy, but at the end of the day, every one of us in this house and outside of this house should want for the government to do a good job and be successful in what they're doing. Because if they fail, the entire country fails. And so when people sit down and trying to wish ill or anything on the government, I really wonder sometimes if they truly understand what it is that they're trying to do. Mr. Speaker, like the Minister of Culture, my good friend from the District of Bordentown East, I was also at the National Gallery function last night, where my friend from Newlands, his sister, Nasaria Suku Chalet, actually won the top prize. But what really stood out for me at that function, Mr. Speaker, was the diversity of seeing so many locals, so many expats, so many new Caymanians, so many indigenous Caymanians. It was really a beautiful sight. And of course, I was really glad that the minister was there also. And the people who came up and spoke to us were people that many people would probably see and would say, but we were surprised. I mean, these people knew our names, they knew who we were. And it goes to say that people do follow what goes on here. Some people could vote, some people couldn't vote. But it really was great to see such a gathering of such great people coming together. Last year, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and myself accompanied the government for the Coat of Arms celebration in the United Kingdom. Your good self was there also. And to see the reception that was held, and even our swanky kitchen band represented the island, and the reaction that people had to seeing Cayman culture on display, it really was phenomenal. And I remember posting some of it on the Facebook Live. And the feed went down quite well with many people who saw it, and to see people dancing and enjoying themselves. And Mr. Speaker, it's important for the public to recognize, and sometimes I say to people, myself being one of the newer members of this house, is that they can hear the political discourse, they can hear the political disagreements. But when we do meet in the lunchroom to speak, there is a certain level of camaraderie that people realize that none of this is ever personal. It is politics, and in many cases, we don't hate each other, we don't dislike each other. We're all Caymanians just trying to make a better Cayman and having our own contribution. And the thing about it, Mr. Speaker, is that it's important for us to recognize that we didn't get here by luck. We got here by a lot of hard work, a lot of people putting in a lot of sweat equity into building what we have. And it's important for us that we never ever forget that. We never take that for granted. The member for Georgetown Central had spoke about the work, and also the member from Eastern had spoke about the work of Alfonso Wright and his contribution to Cayman, improving Cayman national psyche in terms of a level of patriotism. And I hope with the budget that's coming up that the government looks at the Celebrate Cayman team that we have assembled to celebrate our 60th anniversary of our coat of arms and our Constitution, and look at maybe making that unit a little bit more permanent. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I think we have a lot to celebrate in the Cayman Islands, and this is something that we should look at continuing. And I really look forward in terms of that team working on this initiative, in terms of launching that national competition where everyone from all walks of life can feel as if though they participated in putting together this, this national pledge. The thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, and as I said before earlier, that the success of our country came not from immigration but integration of people coming together from different walks of life. And my own grandmother's story bears fruit to that. And when I look at even the people who were influential in my own grandmother's success, having raised 10 children and coming here from 1948, I look at Mike Simmons, who played a really important role, where one day looked at her and said, "No, Susie, you can cook too good to be working for anybody, you need to go open a restaurant." And he encouraged her, bearing in mind he himself had a restaurant, but he was encouraging her to go compete against him. It says something about him, but also says something about who we are as a people. Last week, my good friend from East End spoke about the Honorable Premier, the Honorable Minister of Education, and the Honorable Minister for Financial Services, who, in their prime of their legal careers, gave it up to serve this public, to serve this country. And there are sometimes things it's very easy to forget, but they could have gone out, they could have become very rich in their fields, but they chose public service, they chose to serve this country. And when you do track their own development, and you look at even the Honorable Premier, where his father was a public servant, his grandfather did a lot of work also, you realize it is something that was inculcated in him from a young person. And us now, as political leaders of this honorable house and of this country, have a responsibility not to take what we inherited for granted, but rather to ensure that we do our job to make sure that this generation and future generations of Caymanians understand what was done to actually build this country and not take it for granted. So, Mr. Speaker, I am very happy that many members of this honorable house spoke on this bill. I was glad listening to a friend from West Bay North, and his contributions also. And it says something about us at the end of the day. And yes, it is a feel-good motion. And yes, I believe all of us in the Cayman Islands should feel good for being here. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I am very happy that we were able to move this motion. And I want to thank you and all the members and past members of this Legislative Assembly who have paved the way and have done their job of answered that clarion call to make the Cayman Islands better. And in the end, I say to my colleagues, while we may have inherited a very good Cayman, in the end, we will not be remembered for what we inherited, but rather for what we left behind. And I'm hoping that this is one more thing that we can leave behind. Thank you all very much.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that the government considers launching a national competition during this celebratory year of the anniversary of our Constitution to create a national pledge for the Cayman Islands, and be it further resolved that the government consider amending the relevant laws or laws to recognize the national pledge, and be it further resolved that the government considers amending the relevant and or necessary law or laws to ensure that the national pledge is recited at the relevant events and also recited before a person receives Caymanian status. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Private members' motion number 16 has been passed.
Private member motion number 11 of 2018-19, concessions for tourist-related businesses, to be moved by the elected member for East End.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm waiting the podium so I don't have to hold all this paper up in my hand. Mr. Speaker, I beg Mr. Speaker, I beg to move private member's motion number 11 of 2018-19. entitled Concessions for Tourist-Related Businesses, which reads, whereas the government has reported the highest level of visitors to the islands in recent years, and whereas this unprecedented level of visitors is expected to bring more opportunities for Caymanians in tourist-related businesses, and whereas the concentration of tourists in Grand Cayman revolves around Georgetown and West Bay and their surrounding environs, and whereas there are many tourist attractions in the three eastern districts which are not visited and enjoyed by tourists coming to the country, and whereas there is unlimited potential for entrepreneurship in the Eastern District in tourist-related businesses, be it therefore resolved that the government considers waiving all government development fees, trade and business licensing fees, import duties, tourist-related fees for residents proposing such development in the eastern districts of Bordentown, Northside, and East End, with a construction value of under $300,000, and further waive all fees on tourist-related businesses in the eastern districts which do not have gross revenues in excess of $300,000 per year.
Is there a seconder? The
Mr.
elected member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to second the motion.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that the government consider waiving all government development fees, trade and business licensing fees, import duties, tourism-related fees for residents proposing such development in the Eastern District of Bordentown, Northside, and East End, with a construction value of under $300,000, and further waive all fees on tourist-related businesses in the Eastern Districts which do not have gross revenues in excess of $300,000 per year. The motion is open for debate. The member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have brought this motion to continue the assistance that was started many years ago in trying to encourage tourist-related development in the eastern districts. I am hoping the government is mindful to support such, but I am also amenable to the government making changes to it where necessary if they so choose, because there may be situations where my motion cannot be affected for different reasons, or parts of the motion or the request of government may not be affected for various reasons. Mr. Speaker, for years, the eastern districts have suffered from the lack of tourist-related businesses. And I believe it has come about because we have not been as active in promoting the eastern districts as we should have been. Not this government alone, for a long time. I believe places like Moritz and Cayman Kai, which receive a lot of advertisements, personal from them, and sometimes joining in with government, has been relatively successful. And I'm talking about Cayman Kai, the Cayman Kai area. They have been relatively successful because of that. But there is so much more to be done, to be seen in those districts. I think of Bodden Town with the Bat Caves. Only recently, Northside got a set of caves. I think of East End, the interior of East End, the eco-tourism that could be developed there. I, prior to leaving cabinet, understanding the value of certain areas on the interior, and in particular Winter's Land, I proposed, and the government of the day that I was a part of agreed with me to build a road into Winter's Land area to expose the Winter's Land system to ecotourism. I am saddened to know that more businesses haven't developed around that. Mr. Speaker, I believe the reason being is because the cost of developing small businesses is so high in this country, despite what the government may say that they have given incentives and concessions. I believe that helps, but if the people do not make the application, then the concessions are not forthcoming. And I believe that we can do this by virtue of creating a policy that people know there is a policy, like we do in Kim and Brack, where we have most fees are cut by 50% compared with fees, the same fees here in Grand Cayman. I believe that is necessary to attract more tourists up that way. The furthest they seem to go, unless they're on tourists or on small tour groups, seems to be in Bodden Town, and in particular Savannah, around the castle and thereabouts. The blowholes in East End are being enjoyed by those who rent vehicles. Very few tours go there. The Minister for Tourism agreed to build a little tourist stop by the Record of 10 Sales recently, which is currently under construction, and I should publicly thank him for that before he gets up here. But, Mr. Speaker, there are things like the Record of 10 Sales that has been there, opened by Her Majesty in 1994. And no development. The only development that has been done there is what I have taken monies out of my personal pocket, and people donate to me to assist me, where I went and found the prop from the Ramander and a laid keel from a yacht that was trying to come through the Collier's Channel. And I built a pad for both of them and brought them back to their rightful place in the District of East End, since being a Member of Parliament. And then recently, I built a little walk, meandering walk out there so people could go through and see the different plants. And then I built a little bridge so that they could get up above the brush. Now, we're building with the government, after I requested of the ministers, building this little information craft outlet place with a toilet. Because, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, many tourists stopped there, and we didn't have any toilet facilities. We didn't have any way for them to get a refreshing drink, and I hope this will serve that purpose. But there is more to it than the blowholes. There is much to be seen. I would venture to say, and I may be corrected by the Premier with this, but I believe that 90% of the fresh produce in this country is produced in the land mass of East End. In particular, right in East End. That in itself, people are interested in touring. But because people can't, it's hard enough to buy a bus. But then when you have all the other fees to go through, the import duties and the license fees for the vehicle and the likes, it is very prohibitive for those who are knowledgeable of these things. It was interesting. I was in what we call inland on, I believe it was Sunday, and a couple drove up on the dirt road to the largest farm in East End. And I was standing there and they didn't know where they were. That is typical. People drive through East End and that's what they do. They don't know what else is going on inland. Why don't they know? Because we don't promote it enough. Do we need to promote it? I believe we do. People are interested in seeing how locals live, what the land is used for. How many of them know that I put my life on the line and said I would lay down in front of the first bulldozer to preserve the water lens that produces 90% of the produce in this country? That is in East End. That's the stories that I believe that can be related to tourists, and they would enjoy it and they would pay monies for it. That not about me laying down in front of the bulldozer, I'm talking about the water lens, the freshwater lens. So, Mr. Speaker, in Budden Town, the stories of the Budden Town being the first capital. That's the kind of stories, that's the kind of material that facilitates attractive tours. But without any disrespect to tour operators, tour guides. Very few of them know anything about the 3 eastern districts, or they know very little. But that can be said about many people in Grand Cayman, know very little about the eastern districts, because you know what we have always said, they're too far away. And if they drive one weekend, it's going to be another 5, 6, 8, 10 before they go back. Mr. Speaker, the people in those districts are ambitious. They can run these little businesses if given the opportunity to develop them, if given the incentives through concessions to do that. Mr. Speaker, I want to make it clear that this motion has nothing to do with the hotel aids law, hotels aid law. That's separate and apart from this. This is about trying to encourage Caymanians to get in the business. Mr. Speaker, recently, let's look at another side of tourist-related business that ordinary Caymanians, not people who have financial resources available to them, such as the young lady who is now building a 10, 20 room bed and breakfast in East End, whom I support. Boutique property. I've always supported bed and breakfast. But the one thing that I supported more, or as much as that, or also, is the ability for people to get involved in Airbnb. Mr. Speaker, but I don't know how we're going to guarantee that people who do these things are paying their fair share of Judas fees. Mr. Speaker, sometime in February, the papers reported that Airbnb registered properties in this country brought in over almost 15,000 guests. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't know where they are. And I had discussions with the minister, and he says that because they're not registered with us as Airbnb, so I wanted that figure for the purposes of this motion to further my argument. But that information is not available, except that the government only registers accommodation, but they don't particularly know whether it is what sources it is through. So if they register an apartment and it had 5,000 guests, they don't know if that's Airbnb or but one person or two persons or a family doing it on their own through their own contacts or whatever. So there's no distinction. I think the government may want to try and do that. The only way you're going to find Airbnb is look on the internet and see how many properties they have registered with them in the Cayman Islands. But that takes me to where I want to go with this aspect of this. Mr. Speaker, Airbnb is pays a lot of money for accommodation. In any country, you can book your Airbnb. Now, when I'm talking about concessions, I want people to think about building a little one-bedroom apartment onto their homes. Mr. Speaker, we like to say that our greatest asset, and the minister says this all the time, when it comes to tourism, is our people. And that is true. Now, there is no better way to enhance that or to be able to brag of that than to get tourists to interact with our people. And when I'm talking about waiving fees, it extends into the planning law. Because currently, you cannot build an apartment onto your house unless you call it a duplex. And then when you call it a duplex, there is a requirement for so much square footage of land to be able to do a duplex. And that does not accord with small residential areas, because I think it's 12,500, I may be wrong, is required to build a duplex. Now, there was a time, Mr. Speaker, when the planning law had in there that you could do an apartment, so to speak, onto your house, but you had to prove that you had an indigent family member that would be staying there. That has now been removed because they believe people were renting them out and the likes. Mr. Speaker, we need to get back to that in the interest of our people. Because it's simple, Mr. Speaker. When you're building, one is building their homes, they can always put a little studio on it and rent it out. And the people who are going to do that is in the middle and little lower economic class. But it immediately changes those people's economic status, because then they have income once they do that. Airbnb, or renting it out on a daily basis to tourists, you could be picking up $100 per day. And you're looking at, and it's right there in your home. And they're interacting with that Caymanian that has done this. I believe that is what needs to be done. I'm not talking about building a set of apartments. If you can build a set of apartments to do that with, no, you're going to be, your revenue is going to be much better. I'm talking about single-family homes, and it's tied on to them. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have always talked about, if you're going to do that, you need parking space. Well, everybody has 4 or 5 cars on their driveway nowadays anyway, so you only need that one driveway. Can you imagine what that does, Mr. Speaker, for that family? Here's what it does for that family. 1, they can pay their mortgage with that. 2, they can school their children with it and take that off of the government responsibility. Mr. Speaker, the first time I came in contact with this was in BVI, many years ago. And I stayed with the family for 3 or 4 days. It had this, I had my own kitchen, I had everything. 1 bedroom. But the lady who owned the place, every morning she brought coffee, she brought breakfast. She didn't have to. But I interacted with that Virgin Islander. Every day I knew who her children were, how many children she had, where they were, and what have you. And I was paying just over $100 per night. And it was right on to her house. It was part of the house under the same roof. And that's what we need in this country. We need to look at the law and adjust it so people who have existing homes, and that's why I said under $300,000 to build. That's one of those things. And those who are building, if they get that opportunity, if that is available to them, not that they need to apply to planning to get a variance that the CPA, and the CPA is receptive to it, but if the provisions were in law, then more people, I believe, would do it. I believe that is how we promote our people, instead of them only having to be going to work for someone else. This enhances their income, it enhances every one of the family members, it schools their children, as I said earlier, and it helps pay their mortgage. Thereby leaving Caymanians with more disposable income. So, Mr. Speaker, that Airbnb that the press reported that brought 14,600 guests here could be stretched out into our own people and enhance our tourism product, very much so. When I was told that there's only one in East End, I don't know if that's entirely so. I think it's more than that. But that's fine. But, Mr. Speaker, the majority of this is down on this end, down on the Georgetown, West Bay Peninsula end. And I recall sometime the last 3-4 years that we changed, and Mr. Speaker, for the life of me, I can't find it. I think it might have been the trade and business license or one of those laws. Before the change, one could own 2 apartments and didn't have to do a trade and business license. Didn't have to get a trade and business license. It was during the last administration, I know that. Now, LCCL, I believe it is. One of them. And now we changed it to 6, I believe. It might be 4 or 6. So what that has done has allowed those who can afford 4, and I want to say it's 4 because I can be corrected, but I know it was changed from the 2 that was there. What that has done is it has allowed those with the resources, financial resources and the wherewithal, to come in here, buy apartments without having to do a trade and business license, run a business out of those apartments. So someone comes and buys 4 condos on West Bay Beach. Sure, it helps our economy in that way. Sure, it helps the economy when they rent them out. But the fact is that they are the only ones getting the opportunities in the country. And they're not from here. So my objective here is to ensure the people who live here get that same opportunity, but we need to give them incentives, concessions to do it. And they too will then enjoy the fruits of all those tourists that the tourism minister say he is attracting to this country. Mr. Speaker, it is of paramount importance that we do it. Because failing that, they're never going to get the opportunity to enjoy this country and its economic and share in the economic success. And this is one small way that we can give them the opportunity to do that. Mr. Speaker, I see tourists stopping at those, the fish shacks, not shacks, but they're well-developed businesses now. Fish fry thing on Sundays and during the weekdays, the one right in the beginning of East End is extremely busy because tourists driving in and out stop. I see the one under the big tree, I think, the big tree. Tourists are there all the time. I see Vivian's Kitchen. Tourists are there all the time. That's the kind of businesses that needs the incentives. That's the kind of businesses that needs the concessions. There was a time when poor old Vivian's Kitchen struggled to get Caymanians to come in. It was only weekends that she was cooking for. Now, there's nothing wrong with her expanding out on that bluff so the tourists can enjoy it. But that little business is from hand to mouth. If they get the concessions, they can expand them. The mom and pop things the Minister for Health is saying. That's what I'm after. I'm not after big hotels. They can do what they want. And we got to talk about the big hotels as well, but that's what I want. Those, and then we have a few in the extent that does fishing trips. But there are others. I know there is a foreign national who was married to an East Ender who has 2 boats. He has struggled and built that up. But there are others who has better local knowledge of fishing than he does. But they don't have the wherewithal to go and buy the little boat. Or if they get the boat, they got paid Judas on it coming in. That's the kind of stuff, the little small things that makes a difference, that will encourage that entrepreneurship to rise out of the ashes and start doing something and enjoying the benefits of the same tourism that we spend nearly $100 million a year to attract to this country. That's what I want. That's what we need. That's what Northside needs. That's what Bodden Town needs. I see the grape tree fish fry. I see people there all the time, tourists. Northside, there was a lady who used to cook along and set up a little tent outside the road, alongside the road, Mr. Speaker. That's the kind of stuff. It's tourist related, local as well, but you know, and yeah. And I mean, Mr. Speaker, we see the chicken and the jerk pork little stands springing up all over the place. Yeah, I've been to them, and the tourists are there at night buying food in bundles. We have one in East End that is becoming very successful. Where is he going except that amount? The expansion of that is what I want to see, so that it can attract more tourists. And it's tourist related, so they should have concessions so that they can build something else. Maybe buy a little piece of land up the road and build a real thing. They don't have the access to the finance that is needed to do that. And even if they do, then there's an extra layer of fees upon them, of import duties and the likes and the likes. That's where I'm going. I don't want to. And then we have a couple of places in the East End that they rent out their place on long term. Long term, you're talking $1,000, $1,200 a month, maybe. Because it's so far out, they need to lower the cost to attract tenants. What I'm saying is, when you do a tourist-related business and you get these people booking it because it's cheaper than a hotel, then everybody wins. Because that same apartment that is currently going for $1,000 in East End, if you get the government's assistance to register it as a tourist accommodation, then you're talking $100 a day, and you're looking at $3,000 a month. So you're talking three times the amount probably. And people will do it. People will rent those things. People will rent them on a daily basis. Not only that, here's what happens. Those same tourists are going to stay that much longer because the accommodation is cheaper, and they're not taking anything away from the big hotels. And even if they were, it is going to the ordinary folk. They're going to stay longer, thus spending more money in the local economy, especially in the Eastern End. They'll go over to the little small stores that is open much longer than the stores elsewhere in town, and provide the same kind of produce as those. Mr. Speaker, we cannot lose by encouraging Caymanians to get into tourist-related businesses. The families win. The country win. And the most important thing is the families win. I see the little, the Big Tree little restaurant. Started in a house. That's how most things are started, especially if someone has the ambition and the drive to do these things. Look at Microsoft. Started in a garage. One of the richest companies in the world. Richer than most countries. That little place started there. People liked the food. And now people stop. They make a point to go there. They ask you where it's at. It's way up in TripAdvisor or something it's called. Nevertheless, we don't encourage it. They went up there 1,000,000 times to, not 1,000,000, but they went there to shut it down. if it is not a high-rise hotel, we want to shut it down. There is nothing to suggest that it is less healthy to eat there than it is to eat at some exclusive restaurant. It's a different type of food which people are looking for when they come to the country. You go throughout the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, like you have, like we all have. There are little restaurants all along the side of the road. But it is helping the people. It is helping the people. It's giving them the opportunity to become business people. Who's to say that that is not going to assist them to go and open other businesses that will enhance our economy? That's what it does. But you have to start someplace. But we're just chopping off the legs of our people as soon as we see them start something. The civil service must be to assist and serve and assist and help. That's what it must be for. But we love to go and tell them what they can't do. Why can't we go and tell them what is possible, and I'm here to help you? That's what is needed, Mr. Speaker. That puts me quite nicely in the tourism law. Says, Mr. Speaker, that these hotels must provide a place for small businesses to advertise their business. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, they don't. That is really worrying, and I don't know why the board, the tourism board, which I don't know if that's operational, because the chairman is the speaker, the minister is the chairman. I don't know if the law has changed? Since when? You mean they changed the law? You changed it on your own? You changed it on your own? Or through the public authorities law? Because I know the law says there is the chairman is the minister. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a provision in the, be that as it may, there's a provision in the tourism law which requires hotels to provide an area. I mean, it even specifies the size of the area for small businesses like fishing, snorkeling, and the likes to advertise their business. Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to find that law that I had highlighted the areas that I wanted to talk about. But of course, I don't know who was was taking it from upon my desk, but it seems to have disappeared in thin air. So, Mr. Speaker, there we go. Mr. Speaker, these are the type of things, Mr. Speaker, we need to encourage and to make sure is carried out in accordance with the law. 6 of the tourism regulation says, in addition to the minimum requirements in respect of accommodation and the further general minimum requirements set out in Regulation 5.1 and 2, the following are the minimum requirement in respect of the advertising, promotion, and sale of local-owned tourist-related tours and facilities within the precincts of a tourist accommodation holding a license under the principal law. A, the provision in a prominent place in the main foyer or entrance hall of the tourist accommodation of a display rack of not less than 5 feet by 3 feet in dimension within the operators of the local-owned tourist-related tours and facilities may place brochures of the service that they offer. And B, operators of the tourist accommodation to permit at all reasonable times representatives of locally owned tourist-related tours and facilities to enter the area wherein brochures are displayed under paragraph A for the purpose of contacting, meeting, and collecting visitors who have pre-booked such tours or facilities, and for such purpose to permit such representatives to remain on the premises for such period not exceeding 20 minutes as may be required, and to use free of charge the internal telephone system within the tourist accommodation for the purposes of contacting such visitors. Locally owned tourist-related tours and facilities means an efficient snorkeling, diving, scuba diving, or similar boat operation, car hire business, or sightseeing tour bus operation which is owned either by a person having Caymanian status or by a local company as defined in the Local Companies Control Law, 1999 revision. Mr. Speaker, that's what is going to enhance Caymanians' ability and success in the tourist-related business. These are the small little things that we need to help with. Mr. Speaker, I believe that too many times this government is losing revenue and opportunity also to help our own people, because we're not paying close enough attention. And I'm not saying blaming anyone directly. It may be that we're not providing the resources necessary, human and otherwise, to pay close enough attention to this. But, Mr. Speaker, we just passed or approved an additional expenditures for this year again. And in there, as I recall, we are hiring numerous people to maintain the regulations, develop the provisions for financial services. I didn't see anything for tourism. And we all know that this country is built on two pillars. We all talk about trying to get the third one so that if one break off, we'll still be afloat. Mr. Speaker, I believe that as much attention as we pay to maintain that other pillar, we also need to pay attention to the second pillar. If that is what we are going to hang our shingles on, then we need to do more and make sure more Caymanians benefit as a result. And Mr. Speaker, Caymanians as defined by the law. I'm not getting into who's Caymanian from who not Caymanian now, because that is something I don't engage in. I wasn't responsible for them that born here. I'm responsible for them that became it. I couldn't stop them born here, and it wasn't my place to stop them who got it afterward. We did that. Mr. Speaker, I could say more. There are many other things that I see that could be argued for this particular thing. But I know the government may have some difficulties with some parts of this resolve, and I don't have a problem with the minister saying let's look at it and see what else to be done. Mr. Speaker, there are countries right in the Caribbean who give free stuff, free governments give free fees for a certain level of gross revenue. But we have a law here too, Mr. Speaker, the Pioneer Law. If you're classified as a pioneer, you can get duty-free, you can get things free, like raw materials and the likes. You remember when we started making the water bottles here? The Premier might remember that because it was quite close to him. When our mutual friend tried to get the pioneering concessions, he was denied. But that's what we do. Instead of, now that business has gone out, that operation has gone out of business. One of the best engineers this country has ever seen. And we need to stop that. We need to encourage Caymanian to get into these things. We talk about vocation and trade schools. Mr. Speaker, what's the use of us providing our people with vocation and trade education if we're not going to give them incentives to get into it? We know how expensive this country is to do anything. We need to assist them. And that's all I'm trying to do in this motion. And if the government says that 300,000 is too high, then they'll have to say that. I mean, at least I started with a figure. Let us look, see which one is most suitable, more or less. So it is about us trying to get our people to encourage our people to share in all this economic activity that is going on in this country. We see everybody come here, and I'm not anticipating anything here, Mr. Speaker. We see everybody come here on work permit, and they can bring in cars, sell, resell. Everybody makes it. Mr. Speaker, what's the song that I keep telling us to listen to, Last Resort? It says, there's no longer any frontier. We all have to make it here. That's one of the verses in that. All of us. But if we do not provide opportunities through incentives for very people who live here, who have their families here, who has no place to go, then the service is going to be provided by those who have the wherewithal who come here. And you know what that does? It further marginalizes our very own people. That's what it does. And then our social costs is going to increase exponentially. That's what we'll find. And I'm not blaming anyone. We have neglected it for the last 40 years. Now this legislature has the opportunity, and this legislature, I mean this 4-year one, has the opportunity to change that. And get out there we must get out there from the mountaintop, from the housetop, and shout and encourage people to get into these things. And stop telling them what they can't do and showing them how they can do what they need to do. And this thing of selling land, lease it. Encourage them to lease their land. If someone wants to build apartments, sure, you can build it on my land, but my share is 1/3 of all the apartments. What I do with them is my business. You want to do a subdivision? My land is valued 1/3 of the amount of lot you can put on it. That's my payment. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to hearing my good friend from Far East, the west part of the Far East district, to see how he responds and what he would like to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to respond private member's motion 11/2018-2019, concessions for tourist-related businesses. The member from East End, I'd like to congratulate him on a good presentation. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to congratulate him on his representation in the Eastern Districts, East End to be specific. And I don't think that it is any secret of the progress that has been made in that eastern area that he represents, Mr. Speaker. Hell City has put East End on an international stage, with Hell City being located there. The district can boast of having a world-class medical facility. Mr. Speaker, as he well knows, the Wyndham Reef Resort is one of the successful properties locally owned in the Cayman Islands. He also knows that Maritz probably runs the highest occupancy. On a yearly basis, I think it puts more people on Cayman Airways through their program for bringing their guests down. I think he alluded to the success of one of the private businesses there, Ocean Frontiers, locally owned, tremendous operation, just brought in 2 new specifically designed and made dive vessels for him. Also, Mr. Speaker, Eco Rides in Cayman has been extremely successful with guided bicycle tours and entrepreneurship, and gets tremendous accolades on Expedia and the other sites online. And also he mentioned a boutique property that is being built by a local Caymanian. Mr. Speaker, I start off there by outlining those because that's what each one of us in our represented areas would like to be able to talk about, the success of what tourism-related businesses can offer to the people that you represent. And Mr. Speaker, this government, as is well known, took the initiative to look at a new tourism plan which has been actively pursued for the last 18 months. And again, I say thanks to the member who has brought this motion because he spent a good deal of time and he gave a good deal of input on what was needed. And he has outlined today, again, some of his thoughts which will be incorporated and have already been incorporated in the plan and how it goes forward. Mr. Speaker, the desire for us to spread tourism throughout in a way that it benefits each one of the Caymanians is twofold, because we know that when we see the increase in stayover visitors, which I think the end of March numbers are going to be a little over 8% over last year, one of the reasons for that, and a big reason for that, is because of the Caymanian people and because of what they offer when you come here. He outlined his vision and his thoughts for vacation rental by owner, flip key, Airbnb, some of the questions he had with it, and also some of the statements that have been made here in this house, and some have been made at tourism conferences, talking about the bricks and mortar and the new properties that come online. And as he said, I think 14,000 or whatever the number was, the success that we're having, the percentages that we grow, could not be accommodated by the new properties that have been built. The numbers and the success are being accommodated because of properties that take them into our community. The outline that he gave about success stories in the meeting that we had in East End, talking about the new tourism law plan, I remember a couple, and the lady said, we have a rental cottage on our property, and it's full. It's full all the time. I know you remember the couple. That's the kind of success story that the government was looking for when it came with the new tourism plan and changes that we asked for input. And let me say right now that every member, opposition and government, gave their thoughts, gave their ideas, and gave consultation on this new law, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very timely, the private member's motion that has been brought today, to have this conversation here. And if there are more thoughts and ideas that need to be brought to the forefront, although the motion talks about only the eastern districts, I can tell you there are still new properties in West Bay that are coming online for Airbnb. There are still more properties in the Georgetown area that are coming online. So I think Cayman Brac and Little Cayman also look at some of the initiatives that have been coming forward. And each one of us can look at how we can make sure our constituents benefit from this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he talks about, and the word that I would use, it's bureaucracy of what gets in the way of people when they're trying to expand into this industry. After a meeting in Bodden Town, we went to Mr. Harvey Stevenson's house. And I believe that's an example that each one of us probably know about. He has built and built and built around his homestead. But the reason people come back there is because of him and his personality and the time he spends with them and what he tells them about our history and our cultures. Those are the type of opportunities that we have, and those are the reasons why in each district there was a different need to develop the tourism product. And specifically, again, the Eastern District is an entrepreneurial district. The members there wanted to know how they could access loans, the proper financing. And what we came away with in that meeting and other meetings was, one thing was a loan, but the importance of having money lent to you, it's not getting it, but it's paying it back. And the example that we had to start looking at was, if it's going to be a tourism-related industry, there has to be financial implications understood and put in place that can benefit the people who want to get involved in the industry. Because if you don't make the business case to where you can make enough out of the property that you have to pay it back in a timely manner, then we have set somebody up for failure. So that is certainly a part of the initiative for the tourism plan and the understanding of what each different district and representation had. I will tell you that there was a district that was looking for more classes to be offered in tourism at a school near them that they could further certain studies that they wanted. So what did that tell you? It told you that they had a job in a hotel and they wanted to have more skills to move up. And we took that on board as well. So, Mr. Speaker, the ideas that have been put forth fall on friendly ears. And I believe that the member who participated in meetings and has given input understands the opportunity that we have to move the tourism industry forward as we continue to build it. He also mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that this motion was not about the hotel aid law. But I just want to make sure that when we start talking about the resolve, at this point for development in the eastern districts, the hotel aid offers 2.5% import duty off the 7 Mile Beach corridor. What has happened and what takes place on properties in the Eastern District, as is an example with the boutique property that was mentioned, the Caymanian that was building the property came and sat with government and talked about the need that they had to be successful. And I will tell the member and this honorable House that the hotel aid law did not interfere with that young Caymanian getting more benefits and more concessions from the government than the hotel aid law allowed her to get. And the reason was because when she made the case, it was clear that there were other needs to make sure that the property and the business had the opportunity to be successful. Mr. Speaker, the government clearly recognizes that in the lifetime of a business, the most challenging part is opening it. The challenging part is starting it. The challenging part is finding human capital. The challenging part is getting your customers. The challenging part is making sure that your product is ready to go to market. And the challenging part is consistency, coordination, and cooperation with the government who so desperately wants you to be successful. So, Mr. Speaker, we take note that there is a life cycle to a business, and the opportunity that government has is to make sure that what is put in place helps it at the start, that it gets over that 3-year bump, and it has a life that is enjoyed by the owner, enjoyed by the workers, and enjoyed by the customer. Mr. Speaker, let me just touch on, again, the Eastern District and the flip key opportunity, vacation rental by owner opportunity, and the Airbnb opportunity. From the country standpoint, a marketing standpoint, if we know we have 20% increase in the last 2 years in room stock, we know it didn't come from the hotels, that a part of that was by Airbnb and the companies I've just mentioned. It also allows us to understand that when we market for the next 2 years, that we can incorporate a growth of these opportunities in the districts with Caymanians being involved from the standpoint of cottages, or as it's called, the sharing society, the new phenom that people share rides, people share their home, people share their bicycle, and they also, the traveler, the tourist, gets an experience out of this. So when you share your car, or you share your bicycle, or you share your home, you interact and you get a Caymanian exchange, as our tourism was when it first started. So, Mr. Speaker, we're very aware of that. I also want to, he brought up a very good point about the brochure racks. And one of the things that will be coming in the new legislation is more of enforcement toward that. There is never a meeting, CAP, a West Bay representative, has brought people in. Every meeting we have with CITA, it's discussed. The tourism inspectors are aware, and it is brought to the forefront, and there has been improvement in the offerings of brochures. It's not where it needs to be, and we are not hiding from that fact. But I will say that it's better than it was, and with some different enforcement tools, it will get better. But I also want to make sure that the understanding is that what we are looking at is each individual, whether it be a dive operator, a Stingray City operator, tour operator, the vacationer today goes online. If you go into the lobby of a property, what you see is a person with an iPad or a person with their phone looking at it and thinking about what they're going to do on vacation. And if they want to go snorkeling, they're looking for Cayman Islands snorkeling. If they want to go on a dive, they're looking for West Bay diving. If they want to get a tour, they're looking at a tour. What our strategy has been is to make sure that the IT part of tourism is represented at the tourism department itself, meaning that if you call and say, I need some help with my website, you can get help and direction. I need some help understanding how I get online. You can be proactive and you can get help to make sure you're made available when people do searches. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that has been successful based on the number of people. And the research on this is simply drive to the lobby of a hotel and watch them, meaning the visitors, what they're doing and how they're looking. So I'm not in any way saying that we don't have an issue, but what I want to make sure the member in our conversations, he's brought it up before, is that it didn't fall on deaf ears, that we are doing something about it and we have strategies to deal with it, and we continue to work on it. Mr. Speaker, the motion says, whereas the government has reported the highest level of visitors to the islands in recent years. That is correct. And we are quite pleased with the numbers that we have, Mr. Speaker. We're quite pleased that this should be another good year for us, weather permitting. And we are quite pleased that we continue to offer the opportunity that has been outlined here today that gives Caymanian people a way and another pillar to look at that the financial industry is so ably filled in and driven our country forward with. But as we see and we work to put all of these things in place, I think it's fair to say that with the growth we have, we're going to have some bumps in the road. But we are dealing with them to the best. We're dealing with them as quickly, and we're dealing with them with some very excellent human capital as we are, what I say, the gold standard for the region, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the motion also says this unprecedented level of visitors is expected to bring more opportunities for Caymanians in tourism-related business. We completely agree with the mover's statement there, and we've outlined not only in answering the motion, but what we had started to do from 18 months ago with looking at how we improve and increase the opportunity for tourism through the tourism plan and through legislation changes. And Mr. Speaker, the concentration of tourists on Grand Cayman revolves around Georgetown and West Bay and their surrounding environs. Those two areas are doing well, but I must say that we work hard to make sure that we continue to move people into the eastern districts and do the best we can. The member from East End talked about the building that is going up by the wreck of the 10 sails. I would say to him that I'm quite aware that we're behind on the signage, and that is being worked on. It didn't come as quickly as either you or I wanted it, but it is certainly being worked on, and and it is again an example of the member saying we need signage, and the reaction from the government was, you're absolutely correct, let us figure out how we get the signage. So other things like that we will continue to work on. Mr. Speaker, there is unlimited potential for entrepreneurialism in the eastern districts in tourism-related businesses. He did a good job outlining it, and I and the government am agreeing with him, and that we are all working on to make sure we maximize the potential for the eastern districts, including Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. Now, Mr. Speaker, his comment about, which I thought was a good example of, you have your home and you have an opportunity to either do a one-bedroom apartment or something tourism related. And his resolve talks about the need for working through what creates roadblocks, is what I believe the spirit of this is. And Mr. Speaker, I took the opportunity to write down, when I read this and agree with what he's saying, what I believe the spirit is of the motion. The spirit of this motion is to consider a more aggressive policy for tourism and for small business development with tourism, including, and he has outlined things that he sees are problems with it. Development fees, trade and business licensing, import duty, tourism-related fees for residents proposing such developments in the eastern districts, construction value under $300,000, and future waivers. So if you're doing something like that, Mr. Speaker, and you come and you sit down with the Department of Tourism or the ministry, we're able to address some of those, but not all of them. And the point that was made is that when we look at this, the policy would be overarching, and the policy would go across ministries that people trying to get into this business would understand. So, Mr. Speaker,
In the developmental fees, the infrastructure fee, would he want to do that he can't do anything with, but it does one, sir?
correct. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I've made it very clear that the government agrees with the spirit and agrees with the opportunity that we want to make sure that we work on a daily basis to push entrepreneurial opportunity to the eastern districts that have been identified in this motion. Mr. Speaker, I would like to propose to the mover that we do an amendment to the resolve section. Whether government does it or you do it, I believe we all want the same thing from this. And again, I believe that what we want is the spirit of it to make sure it's overarching and you have a policy consideration for more than just me answering from the Ministry of Tourism aspect, that we consider a more aggressive policy for tourism and small business development, including government development fees, and identify each one that you've listed here in your resolve. But Mr. Speaker, I hear what the member's saying across the aisle here. What I wanted to do in this, since you've taken the time to bring a private member's motion, is to capture the spirit in the resolve. And if we accept this as it's written, I'm not sure we capture the spirit that you're trying to get across. Mr. Speaker, could I have a 5-minute suspension to see if there's an amendment that we can bring?
I was going to break at 4:30, but we can break now and we'll take that 15-minute break. When we come back, we have to suspend orders to
Right.
go
10-2.
after 4:30.
Thank you.
House will suspend proceedings for 15 minutes.